As global geopolitics rapidly evolves, power is no longer defined solely by military strength. Increasingly, economic resilience, technological innovation, and strategic patience are shaping the balance of power. While wars dominate headlines, two parallel developments are redefining international competition. In Europe, we have Ukraine is expanding its campaign beyond the battlefield by targeting Russia's economic infrastructure to increase the cost of war. Meanwhile, China is quietly strengthening its long-term position through technology, industrial capacity, and global partnerships rather than direct confrontation. Together, these developments raise a fundamental question. Is the world entering an era where economic and technological power become as decisive as military force? And I'm Salma El-Fiki, and let's get in focus. Ukraine has significantly expanded its campaign against Russia's energy infrastructure, shifting from isolated strikes to a sustained effort targeting the country's oil refining industry. And according to the Financial Times, repeated long-range drone attacks have temporarily disabled refineries, accounting for nearly 45% of Russia's refining capacity, disrupting fuel production and forcing costly repairs. Kiev views the strategy as a way to weaken Moscow's war economy by reducing energy revenues and increasing logistical pressure. While Russia has restored some facilities, analysts say the campaign is becoming an increasingly important element of Ukraine's broader strategy to erode Russia's economic resilience during the war. Our first discussion examines Ukraine's evolving strategy as Kyiv expands its long-range drone campaign beyond military targets to strike Russia's logistics and energy infrastructure. Supporters see these attacks as raising the economic cost of war, while critics question whether they can influence the Kremlin's strategic decisions. To help us examine whether this represents a genuine transformation in modern warfare, I'm pleased to welcome Professor Vincent Ligorio, the Geopolitical Department Director at Analytica for Intelligence, joining us from Moscow. Welcome, sir, to In Focus, and thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Professor, let me ask you, Ukraine's recent drone campaign has increasingly focused on commercial logistics infrastructure rather than exclusively military targets. From a strategic perspective, what explains this shift?
Well, there is not a shift, but it's an integration of the previous tactics and strategy toward Russia, so deepening the attack within Russia. So if the attacks on refinery, deposit of oil and gas and gasoline had a specific effect of damaging also the logistic for the war, the attacks on wildberries, we could call the Russian Amazon, has a more political, let me say, effect, because it's not beating only oligarchs, so-called oligarchs, but it's beating small and medium businesses and also customers that are, let me say, using these services and rely a lot on these services. So it's trying to give an effect that the war, I mean, from Ukrainian perspective, is that the war is attacking your day-to-day life. So we are stopping the deliveries. We are not attacking just the leadership. We are attacking also the common Russian, that is the small entrepreneurs. So it's trying to change the narrative of this attack. So
Yeah.
it's the point is this.
Can sustained attacks on logistic hubs and oil refineries and transport infrastructure meaningfully, do you think, affect Russia's military operations, even if they do not directly destroy combat forces?
Well, it may disrupt slightly at this stage, but will not stop completely. So we are seeing that the war is moving from, as I say, infantry or ground attack to drones. So the logistic of the war is also changing. Of course, Russia is making a lot of efforts also on the ground because it needs to take control of territory, yes, and from Russian perspective, free territories, and to take under the control. And although Ukraine is trying to use a defensive mode and trying to use a drone barriers, a drone wall that will stop Russia to advance on the ground. But I don't believe that this is affecting. So these attacks on refinery or logistic deposit are really affecting the course of the war. They are more effective. The decision-making process of the leadership. We see that there is a bit of a cleavage, a fracture between two areas of the leadership on what's next.
Professor, Russia has demonstrated considerable economic resilience despite years of sanctions and military spending. If you can tell us, how vulnerable is its wartime economy today to cumulative economic disruption?
Well, of course, Russia entered a period that is of economy of war. So it transformed the traditional economy in an economy of war. Not 100%, so it didn't mobilize all the civil structure for sustaining this conflict. The next step would be that we are expecting that maybe there has called mobilization, that a lot of commentators and in opposition, but even in the supporter of the leadership are trying to say that maybe this fell slightly before the parliamentary election or slightly after parliamentary election. We may have a mobilization. Will not be a fully military mobilization, but we may have a civil. In Russian, it's called гражданская mobilization, so civil mobilization that would take control of civil structure in specific industry in order to enter in a massive economy of war to sustain this conflict.
And to what extent could these attacks, do you think, increase pressure from the Russian businesses or regional authorities on the Kremlin? Or are political and economic institutions too centralized for that to occur, do you think?
Well, we know that Russia is a quite, I would say, decentralized country. So, of course, the president and the leadership are trying to push pressure on regional governor, so in order to increase their capacity to defend the region. We see constantly meetings in the most affected region and the republics with the president in order to ask more involvement, more support over that. So this can create, let me say, a legacy of political disruption between the center and the periphery, if we can say so, because the periphery is asking for more support from the central, from the Minister of Defense, from the military industry to have more support to avoid this massive attack that Russia is receiving on daily basis.
Western intelligence, technology and defense cooperation continue to support Ukraine's long-range capabilities. How important do you think has this assistance become in sustaining Kyiv's evolving strategy?
Well, I would say from a strategic and analytical perspective
Yeah.
that especially Europe is using Ukraine to be, let me say, the last frontier of this conflict. So we know that if Kiev will fall, European Union and Western country will they can panic. Yeah. So as a there could be, let me say, a political domino effect that say, okay, we will be the next. So they are sustaining this Ukrainian leadership. They're sustaining Ukraine military and with a huge financial support in order to understand and to test how the war is evolving, what will be the war of the future. It's a kind of, let me say, unfortunately, for all the victims from both of the sides, is a lab for some of the Western countries because they want to understand, okay, if we will be the next in a few years, we will get the capacity and the capability to counterface this a potential war against Europe. And this is a signal. We know that the former Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Fyodorov, has been invited to become advisor of the Italian Minister of Defense because they say you are the master of Kiev drones wall, so we need to know more about this. We need your expertise in order to interface challenges of the future in this sense.
And could this campaign, do you think, improve Ukraine's negotiating position, maybe by increasing the long-term costs for Moscow, or does it instead risk provoking a broader cycle of escalation?
Both, of course. So the risk of escalation is always, I would say, behind the corner because any factor, any incident, any clash can trigger an escalation. We know that the tension is increasing. The temperature in the boiling room is increasing. Yeah. On the other side, we see the narrative change in Washington with a huge support from Trump administration now to Kiev. So we know that this is not a monolith, so a factor that will be in the long term, staying in the long term. So, but may change. But we know that in the short mid-term, this change of narrative, of course, is playing on the side of Kiev, yeah? And this can change, of course, the course of these conflicts. We know that Kiev got the license to produce Patriots by themselves, so they can work on this side. This can change also. If you get the license, you know also that you can use these as you want without having, let me say, the limits of who borrowed you these weapons. No? So it may change a bit the course of the conflict in this sense.
Professor Vincent Ligorio, thank you so much for joining us here and for sharing your valuable insights. Thank you very much, sir. While Ukraine is using economic tools to reshape the battlefield, another strategic competition is unfolding globally. As Washington manages multiple crises, Beijing is quietly strengthening its technological, economic, and geopolitical position. In our second segment, we examine China's long-term strategy and what it means for the future of global balance of power.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear. If you look at that, or we're out.
The U.S. Federal Communications Commission has expanded restrictions on the Chinese technology by banning imports of the new Chinese-made humanoid robots, quadruped robots and connected power inverters, citing national security and cybersecurity risks. The New York Times stated that officials say the measures are designed to protect critical infrastructure, strengthen domestic AI and robotics manufacturing, and reduce dependence on the Chinese supply chains. Existing approved products are unaffected, but future models will face the restrictions. China condemned the move as discriminatory and warned of retaliation, arguing the U.S. is politicizing technologies and supply chains. Our second discussion looks beyond today's headlines to China's long-term strategy for competing with the United States. While global attention remains focused on wars and regional crises, Beijing is strengthening its technological, industrial, and economic foundations. As expectations grow for a Trump-Xi meeting, we ask whether the two powers are managing competition or entering a new era of strategic rivalry. And joining us from Hong Kong is the political expert, Mr. Benny Kwok. Welcome,
Hello.
sir, to In Focus, Mr. Kwok.
Hello. Hello.
Sir,
hello, everyone.
Let me ask you now. China's
Okay.
leadership often speaks about preparing for a protracted struggle. How would you describe Beijing's long-term strategy in its competition with the United States?
So, thanks for having me. So I would say the so-called strategic patience of Beijing has been being researched by the United States side for a couple of years. So, one of the U.S. Think tankers, one of the U.S. You may say scholar, who is named Dos Rushi. So, would have a book calling the Beijing strategic patience in terms of the so-called long game. That is, Beijing using several decades to build up its strategy to try to challenge U.S. The hegemony around the world, that China is going to shaken U.S. Hegemonic position around the world, so that China could try to be more dependent, at least on the economic side, and at the end that could so-called share the world with the United States. So, for example, like the rare earth, the critical minerals, China has been building this sector since the 1980s. So that means you're seeing that China has taken quite a very long time to build up such technology that could compete with the West, and at the end to try to shaken the position of the United States. Of course, why China has such the so-called the advantages to challenge the United States, at least the whole West, the whole the Western world, and that is because of course, that is the population of China and the size of China, and also, of course, at the end, that is China has the so-called the very unified power. That China do not need to take into consideration of the so-called human rights, so-called environmental costs.
Yes.
China can use.
Mr. Kwok, can I ask you, unlike Washington, which frequently responds to immediate geopolitical crises, China appears to prioritize long-term investments in technology, industry, and economic resilience. Is this strategic patience becoming one of Beijing's greatest advantages, if you can tell us?
Yes, because Beijing can do whatever it wants, whatever it costs with any kind of the political, environmental, economic costs. So that means, for example, like now we all know that Beijing would like to develop its AI and the semiconductor sector that could try to be more dependent instead of relying on the US lead AI and semiconductor sector. So you're seeing Beijing is powering numerous costs and also power numerous of the talents into the developing the AI and the semiconductor sector for the sake of sacrificing the many of the economic costs. So because at the same time you're seeing the China is entering into next phase of the for the economic reform. In the past, China is relying on the property market, relying on the manufacturing sectors that will generate the revenue of for the China economy. But now, within a decade, then China is already shifting its focus on developing AI, developing on the semiconductor.
Yeah.
Of course, it is a very difficult job for European powers. It is very difficult for even Japan to do such a drastic change from one sector to another sector with numerous costs. That is a state-led economic model that could attract a lot of money, that could attract of the global investor attention, believing that China is really chasing the US side. Why China can do so? Because China has a very unified, concentrated political system, and that's why the people would believe that Beijing has the unified power, and Beijing has monopolized all kinds of the financial resources, so that, and of course, we all know that except the United States, China is the second largest power around the world. They
Yes,
have the
absolutely.
many of the talents that China can do so.
Let me ask you, Mr. Kwok, if China has
Yep.
accelerated efforts to achieve technological self-reliance in artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and advanced manufacturing, can you tell us how close is Beijing to reducing its dependence on Western technology?
Of course, first, why China can try to reduce its gap with the West or even the United States, because China has the system that has this so-called closed system. That is while the United States, while the West developing its technology or economy in a so-called free market system, China could block the Western, so the Western influence. That means China is building its economy for the so-called export-led, producing all kinds of the products around the world and then selling it all around the world. Of course, before the COVID, China is still importing a lot of the Western technology, attracting a lot of the Western capitals. But at the same time, China is forcing those Western capitals in many sectors that could form the so-called joint venture, so that China could manage them, forcing them, directing them into the so-called China favorite channels. That is, on one hand, China is importing those Western technology. On the other hand, China is controlling those imported capitals into its favorite ways, so that China could buying the time. China is attracting them to help the China to build its own technology, to build its own sectors. On one day, then the China can be more build its dependent sectors and try to challenge the West and of course the United States. It is not the other countries can do so, because the Southeast Asia, even Japan, and even they are willing to do so, but they don't have such the market, and their political system cannot afford the country to build up such a strategy, and at the end, because such China's special political status that is being accepted by the United States to do so in the before the COVID. That is because at that time the United States and China have a relatively friendly relations, unlike now.
Okay, can I ask you, Mr. Kwok, the recent US-Iran tensions highlighted different approaches by Washington and Beijing. Has the Middle East become another arena of strategic competition between the two powers, do you think, even without direct military confrontation?
I would say China would like to capitalize the US-Iran war, but no matter directly, indirectly, so they're trying to drag US attentions or even cause into the Middle East, so that to extend the so-called the future war between China and the United States on the no matter in Taiwan or in the South China Sea as late as possible, because of course Beijing has no confidence, Beijing don't think it could so-called win, and it could have any advantageous position to combat or to fight with the United States in terms of the Taiwan or in terms of the South China Sea. But if U.S. is being dragged in the Middle East, that means the United States could not concentrate and could not put all of the resources into the Asia Pacific. Then China could buy the time to so-called to learn what in the coming battlefield, could learn how to so-called manage the drone technology, could learn what the United States is going to use its latest military technology in the battlefield of the Iran or even in the Ukraine.
Yeah.
So so that's why the Iran war is for such meaning for the China to try to drag the United States into it and to extend so-called the date with the war of the fight with the United States as long as possible.
Mr. Kwok, China continues expanding its influence across the global south through trade, infrastructure, and investment. Is Beijing winning geopolitical influence, do you think, by offering economic partnerships rather than security alliances?
First, the security alliances is one of the weakest form for Beijing to so-called to offer the global south, because even though we all know China is not just the second largest power around the world, and China has a very largest military buildup, but China has no or very little experience on expanding its military influence out or beyond or outside Asia Pacific. So that means so you are seeing very few or no military bases maybe in Latin America. There may be one in the Djibouti of the Africa, but rather than that, many of the so-called military presence of China is either on the South China Sea or in the surrounding Taiwan. So I would say the global South may not benefit from the China's military presence, and at the end they may not benefit from the benefit from the security presence from China. But for the economic side, I would say it is yes or no. That is, of course, the global South always welcome China to challenge the United States the hegemonic position around the world. So that means the United States could no longer to direct the economic activities, no longer direct the capital position, capital flow around the world. At least there is another big power that could share the position of the United States. But for the no side, but for the but for the bad side, that is China is also eating the position for the global south. What I mean that is because China is so big, China is so efficient. That is, China is taking out all the chances, taking all the chances that the global south that could do. What I mean that is, China is extracting many of the so-called manufacturing chances, taking out all of the. I would say that is because the supply chain of China is so efficient. That is, no matter is the lower end industries, the middle end industry, or even the high end industry, if you want the cheap or even and qualified products and the services, first you would think of China.
Okay.
So even though the Southeast Asia, even though Latin America could be the alternatives, they are not as good as China's war. So that means that when you are seeing the tariff war from the United States against China, the United States is trying to favoring the Southeast Asia, favoring the Latin America, even the India, so trying to lure the capitals that in the old days that is concentrating on China and luring them to moving out from China to try to diffuse them
Mr. Kwok,
into
can
the Southeast.
Can I move to my next question and ask you that there's an upcoming expected Trump-Xi meeting later this year, and that's attracting a lot of global attention. What issues do you think are likely to dominate the agenda? And could the summit actually establish clearer rules for managing strategic competition, in your opinion?
I would think the coming summit, the one of the agenda, of course, is Taiwan. That would be mentioned in every summit from the Beijing side, and the United States would repeat the same statement. So I would say it is the regular one, but I don't think the status of Taiwan will be changed for this summit. But there is something new, I would say, that we all could pay attention. That is how Xi Jinping and Donald Trump would do is the so-called AI governance. So you're seeing it should be a few weeks ago, Xi Jinping just hold so-called a global conference stating the Beijing's Beijing position on how to project its influence on the AI governance. Because on one hand, you're seeing the United States lead the AI development is focusing on so-called closed sources. On the other side, China is promoting the open sources of the AI models.
Mr. Benny, unfortunately, I'm going to have to, I'm running out of time, but that was Mr. Benny Kwok. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your valuable perspective on China's long-term strategic vision and the evolving dynamics of global competition. And that was In Focus, and thank you so much for watching, and do stay tuned for more updates on Q News.